I help you because maybe I'll introduce myself first.
Yes.
Yeah. So my name is Ingelou Stol. I'm communication manager at the High Tech Campus Eindhoven and founder of Female Tech Heroes, a platform that strives to create more diversity in the tech world. So during this event, we bring together to the stage the conversation towards retaining international talent, dual career, and creating an inclusive ecosystem. So as a company, how do you start with this, with working on diversity and inclusion, and what are the challenges? And why is it so important? So in this afternoon panel, we talk with the game changers, so people who are leading on diversity and inclusion while aligning their business goals. So give a very warm virtual welcome to Astrid Balsink, Global D&I Director at Philips. Justin Foster,
Hi.
Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer at DLL. And Rodrigo Caetano at Teixeira, I hope I pronounced your name right, Diversity and Inclusion Business Partner in Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia Pacific at Uber.
Hi, everyone.
Hello. So welcome. So before we start, we really like to have some interaction with you. So at the end of this panel, we have a Q&A where we try to answer as many questions as possible. So if you have questions during the session, just write them down in the chat and we will ask them later. So perfect. Justin, let's start with you. You're calling right from North Carolina, right?
I am.
How early is it now at your home?
It's about 7 o'clock in the morning.
Ah, you're a diehard. So could you tell us, why is diversity and inclusion so important for you?
Yeah, I think what a great place to start. And first, I want to take the opportunity to say thank you and the rest of the fellow panelists. You know, it's a pleasure to be involved today. So why is D&I important? I think when someone asks that question, it's natural to immediately go to research and why is it good for business? And the facts as they're normally listed are, you know, higher revenue growth for companies, greater readiness to accept change and innovate, higher employee retention. But I think it's even deeper and more straightforward than that. You know, companies are competing for talent on a global scale. When you have a company like Uber who comes in and changes the game, and you also have companies like Philips and DLL who are reinventing themselves and pivoting to digital, companies that want to compete in the global workforce economy must be more diverse, must be more inclusive. And, you know, for me personally, I'm an expat spouse. You know, I was a traveling spouse when my wife took an expat assignment in Dusseldorf, Germany. And at the time, I worked for an American West Coast company. So she worked during the day and I worked at night when I wasn't taking paternity leave. And my family situation over that time period was enabled because companies, or my company at that time, and now DLL, are valuing D&I more than they ever have.
That's wonderful. And you told us you were an expat spouse. How was that for you?
It was interesting, right? It was difficult to build a network of friends and others to interact with, but we got through it. It was an amazing experience. You know, I think being a global citizen is important for anyone, but it was great, and it was great for me to be able to enable my wife to follow and go after her dreams.
But you know how people feel, right, when they come in a new environment and what they might need.
I do. You come in and you don't know anyone. I still don't know German, but I didn't know the language. It was hard to meet people. It was difficult to understand the customs and so forth. So it was difficult to kind of find our way and find that network of individuals to interact with. So yeah, it was difficult, but we got through it. It was a great opportunity.
That's beautiful. We're going to talk more about that as well. And Astrid and Rodrigo, and also Justin, if you have questions for each other, just raise your hand and interrupt, because it's a discussion and a conversation between all of us, of course. So Astrid, when we go to you, Philips has always been a very inclusive company, right? Philips used to build houses for their employees in the past to make sure people had a place to live. Of course, time change, Philips changes. How does Philips initiate inclusion now?
We definitely shifted our focus from diversity to indeed zoom into inclusion more, because inclusion, an environment where everybody feels that they can be and bring their best, is vital to make the business case for diversity even thrive. If you hire diverse but no one's speaking up or asking questions or sharing how they're doing, there is zero gain. So to gain from this whole story and the business case is really to create that inclusion and sense of belonging. We've had our ups and downs as every company. We're still like nowhere near perfect, but Philips is definitely committed to this. And it's part of our roots. It's one of the unique things that Philips brings. We're not as sexy as, for example, Uber is, but we bring a long tradition. And I think that is nice because we stem from a background of family. It's the family Philips that brought this company kind of like to fruition in the Eindhoven Dutch area, and indeed took care of their employees. And that level of caring is still present in today's world. So when I started in Philips, I actually invented like nothing new, but I was looking what's already there. It's an engineering company with brilliant people with brilliant minds. So everything was there. And what we do is we indeed looked at our roots, our future to lead in healthcare, and our brand values, of which one is caring. So we said, you know what, inclusion is actually the lens of caring. And if we use that lens of caring into everything we are, we develop, we train, who we promote, if we also use that lens of caring, we will be more inclusive. And as it's part of our DNA, bringing that again to the surface inspired people hugely, and actually things started moving.
That's beautiful. And I know some stories about you that this is also a personal mission for you to create, to make sure people feel like they belong.
Yeah, I love that. I come from a background of journalism, so always challenging the status quo in a very independent mindset. And I have a love for people and orchestrating and bringing them together, making an impact on people and their lives. I think that is really something that is close to my heart. I always say this is not a job, it's a mission. And I first worked indeed in comms and in journalism, but then to move on to this work again, which is very close because you're talking about changing a culture so that everybody can be and bring their best. And I think that differentiation, we're all equal but not the same, is so needed to drive performance, to drive happiness, to actually, because we will shape work more around life in the digital era. And I think allowing people the space and managing by trust will make it just better for everyone. And making that impact on people and their lives is something that I love. When you connect with people on a heart level, that just makes my day. It's wonderful, whether you're in Korea or whether you're in Germany. But if you connect with people on a heart level, that's when we start working together, and enabling that part to be more present in multinationals is just wonderful.
But is it difficult for companies to do that?
Yes and no. So Philips is engineering's engineer's mindset. So even if I present the third slide, people start to say, this is all nice, but what are we going to do? What's the data behind this? So they always like to see the numbers and the data behind it and the research, which of course I bring as well. And then is it difficult? What is difficult is spending the time to manage people, spending the time to check in with people, reaching out to people that you typically don't connect with. It's like, oh, I don't know how to approach these people or this group, or how. Ask them, reach out, check in. So it is very easy, but then the easiest things are typically the hardest, right? So spending time on people to build the relationships that are required to grow the trust that you need to steer in a diverse world that is more remote is very easy if you spend the time, but finding the time or making the time is very difficult.
Can you relate to this, Justin?
Oh, certainly. Well, certainly I can relate in terms of, I do think it is difficult in some ways. And I think, I was fortunate to inherit a really strong group of leadership support. But there's also going to be those people who either aren't sure what to say, and so they don't say anything at all. They struggle to speak up, or there could be that handful that are working against you. And I think it's about what Astrid said. It's about building that culture where people can understand, do I fit here or not? This is a culture of inclusion. Do I want to opt into that? And unfortunately, some people are going to opt out, and that is okay. Certainly shouldn't be the first resort, but people will opt out, and that's okay, because you build a strong culture. You say, this is what we believe in, this is what we're about, and you move from there.
And you attract people who feel included in that, right?
Exactly. And you attract the inclusive type of people, the people who want to work in a collaborative, inclusive environment.
Rodrigo.
One thing that is difficult as well, that is that the things that we're trying to solve, right, as a diversity and inclusion practitioners, are problems that are a reflection of society. So this is not, oh, this is my company problem. It's not Uber or Philips or this. Hey, the word is racist, the word is sexist, the word is homophobic, because this is like 100, 200, 300 years of how society was built, right? So our chief diversity officer the other day, I was having a conversation with her, and she actually said that in her mind, every D&I professional is kind of arrogant, but arrogant in a sense of, we're saying, hey, we want to change 300 years of sexism in this company that I'm working in. You know what I mean? So arrogance in a good way. And this is also on top of what Astrid and Justin said, is what makes the job difficult, because what we're tackling is not this person, this leader, this employee, is how they relate to our company, is their core values, is what they believe in as people, and has nothing to do with work. It's their true core, it's their true beliefs, and you're trying to change that, right, in order to Justin points, fit them in the culture. So this many times makes the job really hard, because you go to someone's core, you go against, or you're trying to change many times someone's core values, and this is truly difficult to do.
So it takes time.
It does. It does.
And even with time, ongoing effort, I would say, because the stereotypes you're trying to make people aware of are actually fueled every day by everything, like every children's book almost that you read, every movie that you watch. It's getting better, the stereotypes in the media and the news. So there's so much stereotyping that, bias is in our brain as of age 6 years old, research shows. So it's really, you're also, that's where this work is now, will never be done, because our whole systems and society are tailored to kind of feed into the stereotypes that we already know. And now we're evolving and broadening, which is great, but that's going to take a long time. So our work is nowhere near done.
And that starts with language as well, right? A fireman, for example, it can be a firewoman as well, right? It's the masculinity in names, for example. And Rodrigo, what is your personal mission when it comes to inclusion and diversity?
Yeah, so on a personal level, I grew up, so I'm based in the Netherlands, I'm based in Amsterdam, but I'm actually from Brazil, and I have been living in Europe for 8 years now. So I moved here when I was 23. And growing up in Latin America in the 90s, and figuring out that I was gay, and I am from a very religious and conservative family, and a family also from the countryside. So at home, I never really could be myself, because it was not fully accepted. And I also went to military school through primary and secondary and high school. So it was also a very restrictive environment. So growing up, I never really could be myself. However, when I started working after I entered university, I was lucky enough that since I was 18, every place that I worked in my city, and then consequently here in Europe as well, was very accepting. And it was not a problem that I was gay, and it was something that people didn't really care. And then I started to see that they actually appreciated that I had something different to bring to the conversation. So this is a personal mission for me, given my story, because I know that there are other people out there that the work is actually the only place they can be themselves as well. And we all need to work, it's not, the majority of us at least need to work to pay the bills, to, afford the things that we want. So working is a big part of our lives. And I want to make sure that people that are working at Uber today can truly be themselves, even if it's the only place where they can fully be themselves.
And Uber has been in the news, not always in a positive way. There was a lot of news about sexism, for example. But for Uber, inclusion and diversity is really important. So could you tell us why and what the company is doing about that?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, we have been on a big journey in terms of D&I. So as a company, we are around 11 years old. So if we compare ourselves with Philips, right, so it has been around for so many years. We're really babies. In 2017 was a really difficult but pivotal year for us, where things really changed. And what happened in 2017 when D&I became such a core important to Uber were really a change in leadership perception, and leadership really honing in and making sure that this would be valued. So with the support of our senior leaders, and by senior leaders, I mean C-level, investing in that, hiring our chief diversity officer, and then trickling that down and changing the culture, to Justin's point, making sure that, hey, everyone this is important for Uber. This is now part of our DNA. We changed our cultural values as well. So there was that change in culture, plus the buy-in from leadership and commitment, both in terms of time, resources, human resources, financial resources, and that started to change how the company is, and what kind of culture the company has, and what kind of processes we have as well, to make sure that that we have inclusive process that offer the same opportunity for people.
So the
Obviously,
leadership really stepped in and said, we are giving now the time, the people, the resources, because we need to do this good.
yeah, it was the time that either we did that or we would stop existing as a company. And people realized it. People were like, hey, given everything that has happened with us, if we don't change 180 degrees, we're not going to exist in 2 years anymore. And we were a company that changed everything, right? We changed how people move from A to B. We disrupted an industry. So to see that go, stop existing because the company did not care about people, about inclusion, was really not what we wanted to be, because everyone was so passionate about Uber, about its mission. So it was that, aha moment, either we change or we will not exist anymore. And people did really change. Obviously, what I was going to say is that we are nowhere near done. There's so much to be done, but compared, I joined Uber in 2017. So I remember actually receiving my offer and thinking a bit after everything that happened, maybe a couple of weeks, and I was like, what did I get myself into? Should I accept this or no? I decided to take to gamble and go with it. And 4 years later, I'm still here, right? So, but the change is so big, like the change is so clear. And yeah.
And how is this as at DLL, Justin?
Yeah, I think we've all kind of alluded to that the journey that we're on from a DE&I standpoint is not a sprint. It's a culture change, and with most culture changes, that's going to be a multi-year journey. So at DLL, I think we were in about year 3 of that journey. So it was the right moment for us to add a leader in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I don't recommend that every company who's on this call rush out and hire a director of DE&I. I think that person is going to solve everything, because every company needs to assess where they are on their journey, and do they have leadership buy-in? Do they have, the right structures in place before they start down that path? And so, having said that, I think DLL has taken a very big step for us to add a head of diversity and inclusion. I think we're leading the way in our industry in every corner of the globe, and I think we're trying to bring our competitors along with us, because I think it's I'll get the saying wrong, but a tide raises all boats or raises all ships or something like that. But we want to make our industry more diverse and more inclusive than it's ever been.
I see you nodding, Rodrigo.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting what Justin just said in terms of evaluating where you are in order to hire people, because we actually had someone prior to 2017. It was not a senior person in D&I, but we had someone. But because the company was not ready, because there was not really a leadership commitment, this person could not do their job, and not because they're not good, but because they didn't have any resources, they didn't have the voice, they didn't have the seat at the table. So after that, as I said, it took time, for the company to realize and have that aha moment, hey, we need to change. And once that happened, the D&I team was actually built and given the resources and allocated. And today we have a D&I team. Now we're 9 and we're going to 17. So we're actually almost doubling our team right now globally. But this also took time. The first time that happened was not enough. And this was top down and bottoms up as well. So there was a lot of efforts coming from the ground, from the employees. But obviously, all of us know that that's not enough, right? If the leadership is not bought in, the grassroots efforts are not going to be enough, because at the end of the day, the difference, or one of the big difference between D&I and like activism is that D&I are changing specifically process within the company, right? It's not about performance. It's not about just holding events or things like that. It's actually about changing HR processes. It's changing systems. It's systematically changing how you evaluate people, how you hire, how you fire people, how you pay. So there's this whole thing that you need the commitment of the company. Otherwise, you're not systemically going to change things to actually make a difference in the short and in the long term.
Yeah, so it's a very big process, right, Justin?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, when you're hiring a chief diversity officer, you're also hiring a chief disruption officer, because an individual that comes in is going to shake some trees, is going to make some noise, it's going to change the status quo.
But people need to be ready, right?
You need to be ready for that. You need to be ready for a disruption like that.
Astrid, what advice would you give to companies that are watching right now and like, I don't know where to start? Where do you start?
Oh, I always say small is the new big anyway, so that's fine, because we live in the social era and we're very connected, and small things become very visible. So just make it small and start. I love Justin's chief disruption officer. I just had a conversation with someone, and they asked, like, okay, what has helped you most in this work? And one of the requirements is really to have the backup of leadership and the CEO, because to your point, you will encounter resistance and people start to kind of say, oh, she's not functioning, and because you're touching upon people's values and they might get very defensive. So I would also say, as an I&D professional, you need to be maybe a seasoned professional, but equally important, if so not more, you need to be a seasoned human being to actually have the empathy, the patience to go slow. This work is never quick. If you go quick, you hire a lot, they will run out the back door. If you're kind of like doing programs quickly and there is no dialogue, there is no gain in any training. It's about the dialogue, the learning together and creating this movement. And what we did, if you talk about different approaches, we deliberately chose to keep it very small in Philips. That's what I wanted to be like the lice in the fur. I often refer to myself as chief orchestration officer. So what we did is actually what I saw coming is where they said, oh, you're in now as the chief I&D officer. We celebrate pride, so let's put the budget on your budget. We do this, let's put it on your budget. So my team and budget would explode. And with the first restructuring, it would be like cut in half or out. And I want this to stay. And I think it's not an HR thing. It's something that should be co-owned by the business. So I get now increasingly, we're only 3 people, but we're connecting everything that's there. So Philips hired me because they had all the best practices that companies have in place, but it was not moving. And it was not moving because it was not connected. So leadership needs to be involved, your people need to be involved, and you need to kind of connect the dots in a way that people start to understand what you're trying to achieve. And then actually they get enthused and want to contribute, and the flying wheel starts to turn. And what I see now is that marketing, for example, has dedicated a person solely to D&I in the marketing organization, high up in the marketing organization, and they start to work with me. So we have now asked for a dedicated lead in TA, because they're so important, to say, can someone coordinate all the TA initiatives across TA and then be our liaison? We work with countries and markets to say, you start a pilot and look at equal opportunity and an assessment. And if that works, we build a global framework from that. So if companies are struggling to begin, just begin somewhere where the energy is. We always go where the energy is, because if you go into an area where there's resistance or a leader that's not committed, forget about it. Go where the energy is, because that will grow. And from that, people start to hop on the bandwagon. So every program we do, we never have a deployment plan. So we start with mental awareness training, and the UK said, we really want this. And it was running in the UK and successful. And all of a sudden in Pittsburgh, US, they said, hey, we like that program. We want to run it too. So it all grows by energy. It's more of a holistic approach. But if you start small and it works, others will start to notice and want to join. And that's how we grow this is for me more about growing a movement. And that's where programs and initiatives keep growing if people are energized by it. And then it's like, oh, this is interesting and it works, and you have some proof points. And this is how things grow. So start small.
Interesting. That's really interesting. And Justin, if you hear this, do you recognize this kind of approach?
I do, and I also am really jealous because Astrid, comes from a communications background. I think that being an expert communicator is really important too in this work, because people are really in tune to the words that you're using from a diversity, equity, inclusion standpoint. They're trying to hone in on what words should I be using. They're trying to find the language, and they're trying to find it in you. So that they can say the right things, because people are very toned in and saying the right things and avoiding the wrong things rather than failing forward. And I say this all the time in our company, that we're going to say the wrong thing, we're going to make mistakes, and that's okay, but you have to learn from those mistakes. That's important to what we say, fail forward, and make sure that you're doing so with grace. And we do that from a place of everyone here is supposed to help each other. And so if someone says the wrong thing or says someone incorrectly, correct them with empathy, and help them make sure they don't make that same mistake again. And I think that's so important. And what Astrid talked about, the energy, we do something very similar. We're a very decentralized organization. The countries really drive our organization. And so we start things in a Brazil, and we say, Brazil becomes our model of excellence. And as Astrid mentioned, Chile and Mexico then say they want to jump on board, and the United States doesn't want to be outdone, and then we head to Eindhoven. And so we allow those kind of pockets of excellence to happen all over the world, and then we rise things up and make them corporate after they've been successful at the local level.
And also a question that comes in from the attendees. We talked about the responsibility for driving D&I, right? And someone is asking, who should be responsible? Is it HR or is it more?
The CEO is responsible. The CEO is responsible for driving D&I. That's my opinion anyway. So we have an executive inclusion council that is chaired by Bill Stevenson, our CEO. He sets the agenda, he sets the direction, and with him in that group of 10 senior leaders, set direction for diversity and inclusion. They drive the ship, so to speak. And they approved our pillars from our strategy. They continue to look at metrics on a regular basis. I really think that the CEO needs to drive that this is a commitment, but then you have to rally the employees, or we call our employees members. You have to rally the members to get on board with that. And I think that's where the communication, that's where the head work and the heart work comes in. How do you bring people along and start that movement that Astrid kind of talked about?
Astrid, how do you look at this from a Philips perspective?
We say everybody's responsible for it. We use the phrase often, inclusion starts with I, because it's so easy to complain, but he or she, or if you do the right thing and you actually contribute your part and check in with your neighbor or the colleague that you don't often talk to or you don't even like, and check in, who they are, the human library, what are they whereabouts, you will make an impact, and you will start to inspire others, because you will know things, you will build relationships, and you will have stories that, and solutions that where others are like, how did you come up with that? Because you make surprising connections. So the ownership for me is with everybody. Inclusion starts with I, because if you start to do it, you will start to kind of impact the people around you. But per Justin's point, it's not going to work and fly. It starts top down. So your CEO needs to have a tangible commitment. Well, we do it on gender because that's quantifiable and measurable around the world. We have indeed, this is one of the 3 pillars in HR. So top down, you have to show the commitment and also be assessed if you're actually sticking to that commitment and making progression. But the ownership is across the organization, I would say, with every individual, because we all contribute, and only together we can actually create this, because that's what you see if you even have nice plans. And there are always so many cells, especially in big companies, with a manager that is not maybe working so well, or a colleague that is not so nice, or behaving not well, and that's where you need to kind of grow together if you can. And again, off is off, so that's GBP complaints, and that's clear. But there is so much gray where people try to do the best thing and they just mess up. And I think learning together is, and having those dialogues across the organization is key. So we often say inclusion starts with I. Start with yourself, and that's where you will make most impact.
I think that's a really nice example. And someone is asking, shouldn't it be easier if also the government, local and international, would be have a more spoken opinion about this? Astrid.
It is easier because companies, I mean, people are conditioned the way they are and they bring bias as of age 6. So we're all part of society, and also the way the government acts and how they're set up and how much diversity there is in your representatives and all of these things. Yes, they contribute to people's kind of like mindset and perception. I think it's a topic that's relevant everywhere and for everything, whether it's sport, politics, it's relevant everywhere because we're in a more connected and more diverse world than ever before, because we're all bringing that out, right? We like to show our own identity, whether it's on a country, market, or political level. Where it helps is if they would think more through how we can bring connection across society. So not having the rhetorics for elections so much on polarizing opinions, but really bringing back what we saw in multinationals is really that in the past year is that we're all very human, right? My kids would run behind me, or you would get a delivery at the door. So I think what we've seen in corporations, we're all very human. And I think being very human brings a lot of connection points, because even if you're part of different, if you bring different identities or mindsets, it doesn't matter. In the end, what we're striving for is that workplace where everybody belongs. And I think that's something that companies can pick up. Facilitating how people work, that's where governments come in. So I would say with remote working, with a maternity leave, creating equity for women, creating equity for people with different identities, that's where regulators come in, and they do help. Because it just, you know, it's a clear given that you have to move. So that's where they really help. Schooling, you know, having like different what are the schooling times and how when we go to school, that all these things, that's where governments can empower people to go and do their work in a way that it suits them.
Another thing that governments can help as well is around what is allowed to collect in terms of data in order to track progress. So for instance, we are launching our second version of employee self-ID today, actually. So, and we have this, you know, this survey, this optional survey with the questions on gender identity, sexual orientation, race and ethnicity. And this is global. And like we have a country by country approach on, you know, what you can ask, what you cannot ask. But for instance, race and ethnicity, sexual orientation, out of the 60 countries more or less that are present, in France, we actually cannot ask those questions legally. So we're not allowed. In the other 59, we're asking questions on race and ethnicity and sexual orientation, but not in France specifically because it's not allowed. So this is something, again, there's this whole cultural background on why you cannot, but on top of the culture thing, there is also the law that does not allow companies to ask and track. So this also sometimes harm your the company's ability to measure, like Astrid mentioned at the beginning, when you present D&I, it's all, every time is about data. So what's the improvement? What's the percentage that we have of this? And if we cannot track, if we're not legally allowed, that also, you know, sometimes prevent us from moving further or discussing further as well.
I can understand. And Uber is also really open about the diversity numbers, right, on the website?
Yeah, we do have we try to publish our diversity report every year. So the last one was in November. So there you can actually see our global numbers for women in leadership, and then different for region as well, and in our different LOBs like tech, non-tech, and in the US you also have race and ethnicity data.
Astrid already told us about the working in Corona times, working from home, kids running around, the mailman is coming, your dog is barking. We all know it. Could you tell us more about the flexible working policy that Uber introduced in the Corona times?
Sure. Yeah, everyone I think has experienced how difficult it is to work, you know, during quarantine with family and everyone stuck at home. Not only mentally it was difficult because, you know, we had to adapt to a pandemic going on. So I always say that it was not that we were working from home, like we were in a pandemic, people were dying, and we were stuck at home, right? So there's a difference between working from home and doing that, having to do that in the middle of the pandemic. So we started to see that there was some flexible arrangements happening, especially for caregivers, given you know, how difficult it was for people that were with children or elderly that they had to care for. And this was going on organically and informally across the company. So what I decided to do was actually to launch an official policy where caregivers would be able to change their working hours in order to, they could not reduce their working hours, but they could change when they would work. So let's say if they say, hey, I cannot work in the mornings, that would be fine. They would also, officially, it's allowed to skip non-essential meetings and not being penalized by that. And the workers that had shifts, they would have, if they needed to change their shifts, they would have priority on doing that, and it would be easier for them to do so. And the reason, one of the main reasons we wanted to do this in an official capacity was, one, because when you are doing this informally, there's always room for bias, right? Because it's that manager deciding if they're going to allow the employee to do or not. So if you have a global policy, the employees are more protected on that, and you know there is the system behind you. And second, we are in perf season now. So in 1 month, we're going to announce promotions, bonus, salary increase. So with this flexible working policy arrangement, it was an official way of saying, hey, you are not going to be penalized by that. You're not going to receive a lower bonus if you skip non-essential meetings, because that was agreed. You're not going to receive a lower salary increase because you're not working, you know, this 3 hours during the morning because you had to take care of your kid, so your partner could work, and then, you know, you would work in the afternoon or part. So we decided to do that in order to, as I said, to make sure that everyone is going to be protected and this would not affect their performance, bonus, promotion, etc.
A good example of inclusion, Justin?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I can really resonate with what was just said. You know, we rolled out our flex working policy in 2019 with the goal of having 50% of our workforce be able to take part of in flex working. The pandemic hit, and we were easily able to transition 98% of our workforce to work from home. With that, we also launched No Meeting Wednesday, and so that was built so that people could, work in the same room as their kids and monitor the schooling that they're doing from home and things like that. You know, personally for me, we have a 2.5-year-old and we have a 9-month-old, and during the pandemic, there were no daycares open, which was challenging, hard. So my wife and I were splitting the day, right? I was working in the morning and she was working in the afternoon, or vice versa, depending. And so it impacted families. The pandemic impacted families in a number of ways. Whether there was tragedy and they experienced death as a result of the pandemic, or if they were burnt out and stressed and things like that. And I think companies really had to focus on well-being of their employee base and their member base, because stress and things like that were going through the roof. And so from an inclusion standpoint, it's understanding where is your specific life situation and how can we best wrap the work around that and best serve you. Because like Rodrigo said, it's not just working from home, it's living from work and working from home. Like you literally can't leave your house in most cases. And so I think inclusion played a huge role in how companies responded to the pandemic.
Astrid, how is it for employees at Philips? Is it more difficult also to get them engaged in diversity and inclusion in this time?
It's easier. They're all part of it, but I would say it's easier because we're all kind of like, in that sense, human. Want to belong, try to be engaged, but then we have all these home issues and challenges, and our neighbor needs us to do their groceries, and so it's more, how do you shape now life around work, where before we would we would prevail work and shape our life around it, and now it's more about life and how do I fit my work in. So, and that's a different dynamic. So the flexibility is huge, but we also saw a lot of differentiation. If you then say, do people buy into it? If we would just say you can have a refund, for example, for childcare, which is something we did in certain markets. But if you, for example, look at Singapore, where we had a lot of young people that actually were expats and felt very alone, we also launched global mindfulness sessions, right? And there we found that people really were very anxious, and recognizing that everybody actually felt the same during the the first lockdown, and feeling anxious and a little bit depressed sometimes, and some people were also thriving, but the majority was struggling, and sharing that was already big relief for people. And I think what remote working definitely brings, and the statement of launching mindfulness session across time zones, was really the signal that we said, hey, as an employer, we value that you take care of yourself. We want to empower you to take time to take care of yourself, whether you participate in this mindfulness session or go take a walk or exercise, it doesn't matter. But we want you to really also look after your own health and well-being. We scaled up our employee assistance program with 24/7 support, but these are all like hygiene things. But creating that conversation and saying, hey, we also value how you're doing mentally, because that's a big part of this whole pandemic, is something that really helped us to engage people across the globe. So the engagement is higher and not lower, because people really, they love to belong. And I would also say with the meetings with remote working, we had a huge opportunity to now invite everyone. So that's a big gain. People have felt much more included, because we didn't have like 6 people in the Amsterdam office sitting together eating their lunch, and then others remotely connected not being able to hear because everybody's opening their bags and eating and laughing, and we're now all remote. So that's much more inclusive. The only disadvantage of that is that you can meet from like 6 to 6 24/7, because you get invited to everything. So you have to kind of draw your own boundaries here. But and that's where I love the no meeting Wednesday that Justin said. But I think it has brought people much closer to this topic than before.
Really interesting. And Justin, you and your family are kind of the embodiment of a dual career household. You work, your wife work, you have children. Why is this so important for you? And does DLL encourage this?
Yeah, totally. So my wife and I are a team. For me, it's important because I want us both to be able to relentlessly pursue our dreams and our goals and in life, both professionally and personally. But also, I think it's important for me to show my 2 boys that you don't have to choose. Of course, there are trade-offs, and we evaluate and we pressure test and do a pros and cons list for everything, every move we've ever made. But I think DLL has really doubled down on, like I mentioned before, flexible work, and allowing people to work from anywhere. I remember when I accepted my offer for DLL, it was, okay, I'll come work for you, but I have to be able to live wherever I want. And I've really taken that to task. I've lived in Detroit, I've lived in North Carolina, I've lived in Germany, and I've moved around the world. And that enables my wife to be able to be in a location that her company says she has to be in, because I can work from wherever there's an internet connection in an airport. And I think that's where we have to go as, that global economy that I talked about earlier. As long as you have internet connection, an HD camera, and access to an airport, you should be able to do the work and be measured on the work that you're doing, rather
But
than
maybe this is
being in
easier
person.
now also, right? Because of Corona.
I think it's easier. I think what I would say is DLL was ahead of the curve in a lot of ways. Like I said, we had launched our flex working policy in 2019, but I think companies in the industry is starting to move in a direction of work from anywhere, a results only work environment.
And yeah, I understand. And Rodrigo, how is it for you in this Corona times? Is it also easier for you to keep diversity and inclusion on top of mind?
Yeah, I think yes and no. Yes, to the sense of now you have a lot of people that maybe before were not so engaged in D&I, that they see, hey, this actually really impacts my day to day, because people are realizing how important it is. But on the other hand, people were struggling mentally, right? A lot of people were anxious, they were getting depressed because of everything going on. There were so many Zoom meetings. So on one hand, you have people that, they want to engage because they see how this is going to be valued to them. On the other, people are like, I don't know if I can work 8 hours a day. I don't know, I'm struggling. When some were working 10, 12 hours a day to help them cope with the pandemic, others were like, I actually don't have the mental capacity to do it. So it was about, I think, finding a fine balance and offering and those that wanted would attend, right? So I think what was most important for the company, and we had some similar offerings as Astrid mentioned at Philips, was, hey, nothing's going to be mandatory. This is going to be offered, but it's absolutely voluntary. You choose, you join if you want to, but these are the resources that we as a company are offering. And I can, like, many times myself, I did not want to have a Zoom lunch. I was like, no, I don't want to look at this computer anymore today. So I'm going to have a lunch by myself, you know, like, even though I live by myself. So I wanted to talk to people, like, I cannot look at this, stare at this computer any longer today. So having that flexibility is what made important for people to really connect with D&I and become more engaged during this time.
There's one more topic I really would like to highlight also, and that's international talent. Astrid, if we look at Philips, for all of your companies, international talent is of course very important. Someone is also asking, Philips is such a diverse company. What value do you think internationals bring to Philips?
Oh, a huge value because we are a global multinational. Active in so many markets that if you want to actually connect with your customers and develop solutions that are relevant and anticipate on the needs of customers, you need local as well as international talent. Because otherwise, if it's just going to be locally applicable without the global mindset, you're not going to be successful as a multinational. So the mindset that international talent brings, the diversity of their background, the different perspectives, the energy, the passion that they bring, it just makes us better. But also, I think it's a requirement to have that as part of your team. You need people with a local background, but also with an international background. You need a good mix of people and perspectives to be as creative as you can be. And international talent, they have seen and lived through so much and also experienced what it's like to be, you know, a part of an out group, work in a different culture, have misunderstandings. So having that knowledge is, I think, vital for any international company, and an enrichment even for local companies.
And how do you make sure people, internationals, feel at home and they thrive in the new environment? I mean, should we involve families more?
Well, some trend watchers say, and I believe that too, that in today's world, as people have the universal need to belong, multinationals have the opportunity to become one of the tribes of the future, right? There will be different tribes, and one of the tribes that you might want to belong to is a multinational. And I think that's a huge opportunity. And I think Dutch-rooted multinationals don't bring that heritage, but American-rooted multinationals do. We have a lot to gain from like the campus approach, and you do things with the family over the weekend, which typically Dutch-rooted or European-rooted multinationals do way less. We have one day, you know, a year that you bring your children to work. So I think family is a big part of our success and who we are. So letting them be part more of our environment or benefit from some of the offerings we have is just a low-hanging fruit, I would say, to going forward.
Justin, what do you think of this?
So I live in a multinational household. So my wife is from the UK originally. So both my kids are dual citizens of the US and the UK. What's interesting about us sometimes is she'll say a phrase or a word and I'll say, I don't know what you're talking about. That's a very UK thing. Like, what are you talking about? And that translates to our work environment. And I think, you know, being able to have that interaction at home and at work is really interesting. The other thing I think the pandemic has done is it's lowered, you know, the artificial borders that we thought we had. And so people that worked in the US and really only focused on the US business are able to interact with people from Brazil and Germany and and all over the world. And so being able to share some of those ideas and that talent has made us more international. But I really think that global citizens, international citizens, people who have lived and worked all over the world are invaluable to our organization because they bring such an amazing and diverse and holistic perspective of how to do business in different parts of the world. So we really value international talent, and spouses, even expat spouses are really important to that as well.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to the beginning of our conversation when you told us you were an expat spouse yourself, and someone is also asking, do you think we should have more dialogue for men as expat spouse? Because there's always a stereotype image when we say accompanying spouse. You know, people think, oh, that must be a woman.
Oh, certainly. My West Coast company, who I work with, the American West Coast company, was like, "Wait, you're going to be the trailing spouse?" That doesn't compute in their that didn't compute in their brain at the time. But I think it's becoming much more common as we blur what were traditional gender roles and we really throw them out the window, which I am hoping to do with my boys, and start to talk through. And I think it's important for men to understand that they have a space here, and to be open about being an expat spouse. Welcome that. When I was in Germany, I would have loved to be able to find some other expat husbands that we were able to create a group and get to know each other. That wasn't available then, but
You
hopefully it's
find them
available in the
there.
future.
Yeah.
Not at that time, but hopefully it will be available in the future as we continue the dialogue.
Yeah, that will be. And do you think companies have to play a role in this as well?
I would love it if companies played a role. We haven't, DLL hasn't been in that space, but I would love it if companies would play a more active role in connecting spouses to other spouses in countries.
Rodrigo, a last question for you. A lot of questions are coming in, but a lot of about implementing the D&I strategy. So, do you have some final tips for everyone who's listening?
On implementing the NI strategy. Well, I will go with what we mentioned first in terms of having the buy-in from leadership. Second, I think having that allocated funding is very important. Third, working with HR and people analytics in order to start tracking data, because once you have data, even if it's just to Astrid's point before, just gender, but once you can see, hey, what's the attrition, how much are we hiring, that is going to help drive the conversation with the business and have a more, data approach conversation. Another thing that is very important as well that I would say, like just, maybe as a last one, is on employee resource groups that can really help, if you have those networks of women, of people of color, of LGBT, it can help, one, drive a sense of community for the employees and build that sense of belonging. And second, those groups can also act as an important tool for the business and a partner for the business as well in order to advise if a new product launch is good or no, if a marketing campaign is good or no, and they can bring ideas to the table on how to change the product that the company offer in order to make them more inclusive as well. And they can be the voice of the employees in a more I would say formal way. So I think that these are some important tips that in my view that you can use to implement DNI.
Really interesting. Astrid, would you like to add something before we close?
I'm giving the floor to Justin because I saw him unmute, and then if there's anything left, then Justin.
Oh, sure.
Correct? I saw you unmute.
Sure, I can go next. I think listening is really important when you're starting on the journey of a DE&I strategy. Understanding the current state, understanding the baseline that you're operating in, especially for multinational global companies, because the tone, tenor, and language used around diversity and inclusion is so different across the world. And so understanding that before you start to build your global strategy and get your buy-in is really, really important, I think. And so listening first, but then having a really crisp communication strategy. And so again, I envy Astrid to have that journalism or communications background, because I think words matter. I think communication is so important as you start to embed diversity, equity, and inclusion into your organization. Again, as Astrid said, that inclusion starts with I. But I also want to go back to what Rodrigo said in terms of that executive and leadership support. I think it's really important that it's top down. I think it's really important you understand the why. D&I just for D&I's sake won't get you very far until your organization starts to articulate the why behind why are we going to focus time, energy, and resources in this space. And that's going to be different for every company, because every company, as I mentioned earlier, is in a different place on that journey. And I think it's important for individuals or companies to understand, own where they are on that journey, clearly state their why, and then move forward from there.
Astrid, would you like to say the final words?
I think everything has been said that is true and very valuable. I think Rodrigo was very complete in his assessment, and I had the same. I think as an IND officer, I think one thing that is important, at least that I put up as a requirement before I was hired, is to be high up in the organization. So it needs to be part of your HR strategy. Your CEO needs to make a tangible commitment, because then everybody thinks, oh, if he thinks it's important, it must be important, or if she thinks it's important, it must be important. I think that is really key. And being positioned high up in the organization is key, because otherwise you cannot have the influence and the impact that you need to have on leadership to endorse this. So if you're low in the organization, you can still make a lot of contributions, but it's more on a project kind of level. If you really want to contribute to evolving that strategy, you need to talk to the people who are heading up M&A, who are heading up different parts of the company, and for them to buy into it, you need to have the buy-in of leadership. So as an IND officer, you need to be positioned well as well yourself.
Thank you so much for all of your time and for your inspiration and for your, I think a lot of people are inspired and learned a lot. So thank you, Justin. Thank you, Astrid. And thank you very much, Rodrigo.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Well, thank you, guys. That was a great, authentic conversation, and a big thank you to Justin, Astrid, and Rodrigo for your willingness to participate and sharing your insights. And a massive thank you to Ingelou for managing this. You were amazing as always. And to everyone who's watching us, stay with us. We have more exciting sessions planned for you. And next coming up is Fluke and Female Tech Heroes. So join us there. And a big thank you from Brain for Development, Expat Spouses Initiative, and a Holland Expat Center to everyone here. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.